My name is Elaine. I used to be the daughter who never said no, until they stopped asking me to say yes. I found out about my parents' 40th anniversary celebration, the way you discover a betrayal. Accidentally, through someone else's careless words. It was a Tuesday afternoon in the faculty lounge when Professor Martinez mentioned seeing the beautiful invitation her neighbor had received. Such an elegant affair, she said, stirring her coffee. The Vieras are having it at their old estate, aren't they? Just family, I heard. The spoon in my hand went still. Vera, my last name. My parents. My family estate where I'd spent countless summers painting the wraparound porch, where I'd learned to ride my bike on that gravel driveway, where I'd held my mother's hand through her cancer scare just 2 years ago. I smiled at Professor Martinez and excused myself to the bathroom, where I locked the door and pressed my back against the cool tile wall. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting everything in that harsh institutional glow that makes even the strongest people look fragile. I wasn't crying. I was just processing. The way you process when you realize you've been erased from a story you helped write. That evening, I did what any reasonable person would do. I called my sister Rebecca. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, and I could hear her children laughing in the background, the sound of a normal family dinner unfolding. "Oh, Elaine," she said, and I could hear the slight shift in her voice, the way it tightened when she was caught off guard. "I was going to call you." "About Mom and Dad's anniversary party?" A pause. The laughter in the background seemed to dim. "It's just going to be small, you know? Really intimate. Mom specifically wanted to keep it to immediate family only. Immediate family." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and choking. I was their daughter. I had been immediate family for 38 years. I had been the one who drove 4 hours every weekend when Dad had his heart attack. I had been the one who researched specialists, who sat in sterile waiting rooms, who held Mom's purse while she threw up from chemotherapy. I had been the one who quietly paid for the new roof on the estate when their insurance fell short, never mentioning it, never asking for thanks. "I see," I said, "because what else do you say when your sister rewrites the definition of family to exclude you?" "Maybe we can all get together afterward," Rebecca offered, her voice bright with false cheer. "You know, something casual. After. When the photographs were taken, when the toasts were made, when the memories were cemented without me in them. I would be the afterthought, the consolation prize, the sister they remembered to include when it no longer mattered." Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching. Because right now, sitting in my quiet kitchen, I'm wondering if anyone else has ever felt this particular kind of invisible. Hung up the phone and sat in the gathering darkness of my small apartment. The silence felt different now, heavier. It carried the weight of all the other silences that had accumulated over the years, like sediment in a riverbed. The silence when my promotion to department head wasn't mentioned at last year's Christmas dinner. The silence when my published research on historical preservation was glossed over with a polite, "That's nice, dear." The silence when I spent my own birthday alone because everyone assumed someone else had invited me somewhere. I had become the family ghost, present enough to be useful, absent enough to be forgotten. The next morning, I drove to campus early and buried myself in my work. I had 3 classes to teach, a thesis committee meeting, and a stack of papers to grade. Normal things, controllable things. Things that didn't require me to decode the complex mathematics of family love, where somehow I always came up short, despite showing my work. My office overlooked the quad, and I watched students walking to class, their backpacks heavy with possibility. At 38, I sometimes felt ancient compared to them. But that day I felt something else. I felt unmoored. Like I'd been sailing by a distant lighthouse for years, only to discover it had been moved without anyone telling me. Dr. Patricia Henley knocked on my door around noon. She was the head of the Cultural Heritage Foundation, a woman whose gray hair and sharp eyes commanded respect in academic circles. We'd worked together on several preservation projects, and she had become something of a mentor to me. "Elaine, do you have a moment?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I have a proposition for you." I set down my pen and gave her my full attention. Patricia didn't make casual visits. "The foundation is organizing a community recognition gala next month," she began. "We're honoring individuals who have made significant contributions to historical preservation and cultural heritage in the region. Your work on the Maritime District restoration, your research on immigrant settlement patterns, your advocacy for the old courthouse, it's exactly the kind of dedication we want to celebrate." I felt a small flutter of something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Pride. Not the desperate, grasping kind that comes from seeking approval, but the quiet, steady kind that comes from work well done. "We'd like you to be our keynote speaker," Patricia continued. "Guest of honor. The event is being held at the Riverside Estate. I believe it's in your family's neighborhood?" The Riverside Estate. 2 miles from my parents' house. 2 miles from where my family would be celebrating. Without me. "When?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "The 15th, Saturday evening. I know it's short notice, but we had a last-minute cancellation, and your name was the first one that came to mind. The 15th. The same night as my parents' anniversary party." I looked out my window at the students crossing the quad, their futures sprawling ahead of them like blank pages. Then I looked back at Patricia, whose weathered hands were folded patiently in her lap, waiting for my answer. "I'd be honored," I said. And for the first time in months, I meant it. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. I worked on my speech during the evenings, crafting words about legacy, about the invisible work that preserves what matters, about the people who tend to history's garden in silence. I didn't tell anyone about the invitation. Not my parents. Not my siblings. Not my colleagues. It felt like a secret I was keeping from myself, a gift I wasn't sure I deserved. 3 days before the event, my mother called. Her voice was bright with excitement, the way it got when she was orchestrating something special. "Elaine, sweetheart, I just wanted to let you know that Rebecca is putting together a slideshow for the party. She's been collecting photos from over the years, and she wondered if you had any good ones of Dad from his fishing trips." I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, staring at it as if it were a foreign object. She was calling me about the party I wasn't invited to, asking me to contribute to a celebration I couldn't attend. "I'll have to look," I said carefully. "Oh, wonderful. She's also making a family tree display. You know how artistic she is. It's going to be beautiful. Dad is just so excited. He keeps saying it's going to be the best night of his life, having all his children there to celebrate with him, all. His children." The words hit me like a physical blow. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heart race beneath my palm. "Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not invited." A pause. A long, terrible pause. "Oh, honey," she said, finally, and her tone had shifted to something that sounded almost like pity. "You know how these things are. Rebecca is handling all the arrangements, and she felt it would be better to keep it small. You understand. I understood. I understood that my sister had decided I wasn't worth including, and my parents had decided I wasn't worth fighting for. I understood that after 38 years of being their daughter, I could be edited out of their story as easily as a typo. "I have to go," I said. "Elaine, don't be dramatic. We'll celebrate with you another time." Dramatic. The word stung like a slap. I had been anything but dramatic. I had been the opposite of dramatic. I had been so quiet, so accommodating, so perfectly invisible that they could forget I existed without even trying. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum its mechanical lullaby. The room felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in like a secret being kept. I thought about all the times I had sat at this same table, grading papers late into the night, planning lessons, writing grants, living a life that apparently didn't register on my family's radar, but I wasn't going to be dramatic. I wasn't going to call and demand explanations or throw tantrums or make ultimatums. I was going to do what I had always done. I was going to show up where I was wanted, speak to people who valued my voice, and let my work speak for itself. I was going to be the guest of honor at my own celebration, even if my family didn't know it yet. The day of the 15th arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel possible. I spent the morning at the farmer's market, buying flowers for my apartment, bright orange marigolds that seemed to glow with their own inner fire. I arranged them in a vase on my kitchen table, a small act of celebration for myself. At 3 o'clock, I began getting ready. I chose my navy dress, the one with the subtle silver threads that caught the light when I moved. It was elegant without being flashy, professional without being cold. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a woman who had built something meaningful with her life, who had earned her place at the table through her own merit. I did my makeup carefully, paying attention to details I usually rushed through. I wanted to look polished, but more than that, I wanted to look like myself, not the diminished version of myself that appeared at family gatherings, constantly shrinking to fit into spaces that had grown too small for me. I wanted to look like Dr. Elaine Vieira, the woman who had published 3 papers on historical preservation, who had saved a 19th century courthouse from demolition, who had mentored dozens of graduate students over the years. The Riverside estate was a 20-minute drive from my apartment, and I arrived exactly when Patricia had instructed me to, fashionably late, so that most of the guests would already be there. The parking lot was full of cars, and I could see the warm glow of lights spilling from the windows of the main hall. It looked like the kind of event I had imagined my parents' party would be. Elegant, celebratory, filled with people who genuinely wanted to be there. I checked my reflection one more time in the rearview mirror, then gathered my purse and the small folder containing my speech notes. My hands were steady. I felt a calmness I hadn't experienced in weeks, the kind of peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The estate's main hall was beautifully decorated with fall flowers and soft lighting. Round tables were arranged throughout the space, and I could see the small stage at the front where I would soon be speaking. People were mingling, the sound of conversation and laughter creating a warm atmosphere that felt genuinely welcoming. Patricia spotted me immediately and hurried over, her face bright with excitement. "Elaine, you look absolutely lovely. Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, and I meant it. She led me to a quiet corner where I could wait until it was time for my introduction. "The program is running a bit behind schedule," she explained, "but that's perfect. It gives people more time to appreciate the recognition you're about to receive." As I waited, I found myself scanning the crowd. It was a mixture of academics, local historians, city council members, and community leaders. These were people who understood the value of preserving the past, who appreciated the careful work that went into maintaining cultural heritage. They were, in many ways, more my people than my own family had ever been. Then I saw them. They were standing near the back of the hall, my parents and my siblings, looking slightly out of place in their formal attire. My father was wearing his best suit, the one he'd worn to my college graduation. My mother had on the blue dress she saved for special occasions. Rebecca was there with her husband and their 2 children, and my brother Michael had brought his wife as well. They looked exactly like what they were. A family dressed up for a celebration, trying to blend in at an event they didn't quite understand. I watched as Rebecca leaned over to whisper something to my mother, who nodded and smiled politely at the strangers around her. My first instinct was to hide, to slip out the back exit and pretend I had never seen them, never agreed to this moment of potential confrontation. But then I realized something. I wasn't the one who should be hiding. I was the guest of honor. I belonged here more than anyone else in this room. Patricia appeared at my elbow. "It's time," she said softly. I nodded and followed her toward the stage. The MC, a distinguished man with silver hair, was already at the podium, calling for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "Tonight, we gather to celebrate the individuals who work tirelessly to preserve our shared heritage. These are the people who understand that history isn't just what happened in the past. It's the foundation upon which we build our future." I could see my family from the corner of my eye. They had moved closer to the stage, probably trying to get a better view of whatever was about to happen. Michael was checking his phone, and Rebecca was corralling her children, but my parents were listening intently, the way they always did when someone was giving a speech. "Our guest of honor tonight," the MC continued, "is someone who embodies the very best of what it means to be a steward of our cultural legacy. She has dedicated her career to ensuring that future generations will be able to connect with their past, to understand where they came from and how they got here." The spotlight found me in the wings, and I stepped forward, my heels clicking softly on the polished floor. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room, but somehow it didn't feel heavy. It felt like recognition, like finally being seen for who I actually was. Dr. Elaine Vieira has spent the last 15 years working to preserve and protect our region's historical sites. Her research on immigrant settlement patterns has been published in national journals. Her advocacy saved the old courthouse from demolition. Her work on the Maritime District Restoration Project has been hailed as a model for community-driven preservation efforts. I heard a sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the audience. I didn't need to look to know it had come from my family. They were seeing me for the first time, perhaps, as something other than the daughter who was good for emergency loans and forgotten birthdays. But more than her professional accomplishments, the MC continued, Dr. Vieira represents something we all aspire to, the courage to pursue meaningful work, even when it goes unrecognized. The dedication to serve others, even when no one is watching. The wisdom to understand that sometimes the most important contributions are the ones that happen in silence. I walked to the podium, and the applause that followed was warm and sustained. I could see faces in the audience, colleagues, fellow historians, community members who had worked with me on various projects over the years. These were people who knew my work, who understood its value, who had chosen to spend their Saturday evening celebrating it. I placed my speech notes on the podium and looked out at the crowd. I found my family's faces in the back, their expressions, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been pride. My mother's hand was pressed to her chest, and my father's mouth was slightly open, as if he were trying to process what he was seeing. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady and clear. When I was asked to speak tonight about legacy and preservation, I spent a lot of time thinking about what those words really mean. We often think of legacy as something grand, something that gets carved in stone or written in history books. But the truth is, most legacy is made up of small acts, quiet choices, invisible work that holds everything else together. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the audience. I wasn't looking at my family now. I was speaking to the people who had gathered to honor work that mattered, contributions that often went unnoticed. I've spent my career studying the people who built our communities, the immigrants who cleared the land, the women who established schools, the families who preserved traditions through generations of change. What I've learned is that the most important work is often the most invisible. It's the work that happens without fanfare, without recognition, without anyone keeping track of the hours or the sacrifice. I thought about all the nights I had spent alone in my apartment, grading papers, writing grants, preparing lectures. I thought about the weekends I had given up to research archives, the vacations I had spent at conferences, the social events I had missed because I was committed to something larger than myself. But invisible doesn't mean insignificant, I continued. The woman who documents oral histories, the man who maintains a community garden, the teacher who stays late to help struggling students. They are all creating legacy. They are all doing the work that makes civilization possible. Now, I did look at my family. They were listening with the kind of attention I had never received at a family dinner, the kind of respect I had never been given when I tried to share my work with them. "I want to talk about a different kind of family tonight," I said, my voice growing stronger. "The family we create through shared purpose, through mutual respect, through the understanding that we all have something valuable to contribute. This family doesn't always share our DNA, but they share our values. They see our work, they appreciate our dedication, and they never have to be convinced that we belong." The applause was immediate and heartfelt. I could see people nodding, recognizing something true in what I had said. I could also see my mother wiping tears from her eyes, and my father's face had gone very still and thoughtful. "The preservation of history isn't just about buildings and artifacts," I continued. "It's about preserving the stories of people who matter, the contributions of individuals who might otherwise be forgotten. It's about making sure that everyone's legacy is acknowledged, that everyone's work is seen and valued." I talked about the Maritime District project, about the families who had lived and worked there for generations, about the importance of honoring their stories. I talked about the courthouse restoration, about the legal battles and community organizing that had made it possible. I talked about the immigrant histories I had documented, the oral traditions I had helped preserve, the small museums and historical societies I had supported over the years. With each story, I could see my family's understanding shifting. They were learning about a part of my life they had never bothered to ask about. Work they had never considered important. Accomplishments they had never thought to celebrate. Legacy isn't inherited, I concluded. It's earned. It's built through consistent action, through dedication to something larger than ourselves, through the willingness to work without recognition, because the work itself is meaningful. And when we do that work with integrity and passion, we create a different kind of family, a family of choice, bound together by shared values and mutual respect. The applause was thunderous. People rose to their feet, and I could see genuine emotion on faces throughout the crowd. Patricia was beaming, and several of my colleagues were nodding with approval. I had said what I needed to say, and it had been heard. As I stepped away from the podium, I caught sight of my family again. They were still standing in the back, but they weren't applauding. They were just watching me, their faces reflecting a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite read. Guilt, perhaps. Regret. Maybe even a belated recognition of who I actually was. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and conversations. People approached me to talk about my work, to share their own stories of preservation and community building, to thank me for my contributions. I felt surrounded by warmth and appreciation, by the kind of genuine connection I had been missing for years. I was talking with a group of graduate students when I noticed my parents approaching. They walked slowly, hesitantly, like people who weren't sure they had the right to interrupt. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, and my father's usual confident demeanor had been replaced by something much more uncertain. "Elaine," my mother said, softly when they reached me. "We had no idea. We didn't know about any of this." I looked at them. These people who had raised me, who had loved me in their own complicated way, who had somehow managed to make me feel invisible in my own family. They looked smaller than I remembered, older, more fragile. "I know," I said simply. "We're proud of you," my father said, his voice thick with emotion. "We should have said that years ago. We should have asked about your work, should have celebrated your accomplishments. We should have invited you to the party," my mother added, the words coming out in a rush. "Rebecca said it was supposed to be small, but we should have insisted. You're our daughter. You should have been there." I felt something inside me soften, just slightly. These were the words I had been waiting to hear for years. the acknowledgement I had craved. But I also realized that I didn't need them anymore, not in the desperate way I once had. "I appreciate that," I said, "but I think I was exactly where I needed to be tonight." My parents exchanged a look, and I could see them grappling with the implications of what I had said. They were realizing that their daughter had built a life, a career, a community that they knew nothing about. They were understanding, perhaps, for the first time, that their absence from my life had cost them more than it had cost me. "We'd like to try to do better," my mother said quietly. "If you'll let us." I considered this offer, weighing it against years of disappointment and neglect. I thought about the woman I had become, the strength I had found in building my own family of choice, the confidence that came from knowing my worth wasn't dependent on their approval. "I'd like that," I said finally. "But it has to be different this time. I can't keep being the family afterthought, the one you remember when it's convenient." "It will be different," my father promised. "We see you now. We understand what we missed." Maybe they did. Maybe they would follow through on their promises, make an effort to be part of my life in a meaningful way. Or maybe they would slip back into old patterns, forget this moment of clarity once the immediate shame wore off. Either way, I would be fine. I had learned to build my own celebrations, to create my own sense of belonging, to find my worth in work that mattered and relationships that honored who I was. As I drove home that night, I thought about the evening's events. I thought about the speech I had given, the connections I had made, the recognition I had received. I thought about my family's shocked faces, their belated apologies, their promises to do better. But mostly, I thought about the woman I had become, the woman who had stood on that stage and spoken her truth, who had been honored for work that mattered, who had built a life of meaning and purpose despite being overlooked by the people who were supposed to love her most. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment in the darkness, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Through my kitchen window, I could see the marigolds I had arranged that morning, their orange blooms glowing softly in the lamplight. I walked inside and stood in my quiet kitchen, the same kitchen where I had sat so many nights feeling invisible and forgotten. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like home. Not because anything had changed about the room itself, but because everything had changed about how I saw myself in it. I was the guest of honor at my own life, and I always had been. I just hadn't realized it until I found the courage to claim my place at the table. Some families are born, others are built, and sometimes the most important family of all is the one you create with yourself. The recognition that you matter, that your work has value, that your presence is a gift to the world, whether or not anyone else chooses to see it. I may not have been welcome at their celebration, but I had arrived as the guest of honor at my own. And that, I realized, was exactly where I belonged.